You ready to jump into calls, Steve?
Absolutely. Let's do this.
Okay, so our first caller is from North Carolina and wants to talk about the idea of Christian agnosticism. James, you're on with Steve and Ethan. How are you?
Hey guys, doing pretty good. How's everyone doing this fine evening?
I am
very well, thanks.
Good. So, what do you got
first
for
off,
us?
Steven, huge fan, brother.
Hey,
Oh,
pleasure.
sorry. Go
Thank
ahead
you
and
for ringing
gush.
in.
I was gushing too.
No, thank you very much.
All gush, I have to remember the delay. But Steven, huge fan. Keep it up. I've been following your channel for quite some time. So hopefully I won't be I'll be one of many people who gush over you tonight. So thank you so much.
And you are a Christian, aren't you?
I am a Christian, yes.
Nice. All right, cool. So what would you like to chat about?
Yeah, so let's kind of dive into this idea of Christian agnosticism. And there's a few ways we can probably look at this, and I'd love to hear, some of your guys' input on this. So really quick, Christian, because of the ideas associated with Christianity, I would say we're still feeling the ripples of that effect, right? In more ways than one. And then agnosticism, because it's very hard to actually know. I would probably say one of the biggest tenets in Christianity, which is Jesus died on the cross and resurrected, right? So there's enough evidence or lack of evidence that makes it a little problematic. So I guess on that, what are your guys' thoughts? And we'll kind of open it up from there.
Would you like to start?
Okay, so with Christ's resurrection, the first thing I think of when it comes to Christ's resurrection is a point that was expressed by Hitchens. It's been expressed by many, and that is that even if Christ did resurrect, it doesn't, by virtue of that, show that any of his other claims were true. And this goes towards, the level of credence that we can have towards a proposition such as Christianity. It won't be just that you can grant one of the major parts and all of the rest will bleed out. So, I guess my first take on it is that I think I need to know more specifically. Yeah, actually, I need more on the table, if that's all right. Tell me what you're wanting, unless, Ethan, you want to jump in.
No, please.
Yeah, so what I would kind of dive in on is the agnostic part of it is so here's where everybody cheers, right? It is next to impossible to prove the idea that Christ rose from the dead. Okay, it is next to impossible. And even then, the accounts are, there are some issues with the accounts. So from the propositional perspective of that right there alone, we have problems. Now we can expand that out to the meta story of and I would say the Bible as a whole, and there's a Christian idea there. I think it revolves around grace. It revolves around probably the idea that the victim has some kind of say, right? And we see that in a direct response to Rome as well. So I don't know if I would agree that the individual propositional claims, if you undermine that, it goes away, because we've been doing that for now 2,000 years and it hasn't gone away. So I don't know if is that more on the table? What else do you need? And where do you want to open this up to?
Well, one point I could raise in reference to what you were saying there is, it's the idea that Christianity has preserved itself over 2,000 years. Is that the position you were expressing or endorse or not?
Well, yeah. Christianity has definitely preserved itself or perpetuated its existence for a good period of time. And maybe even the symbology associated with Christianity is reaching its end. but I don't see that happening anytime super soon. So I guess I would hold to the idea that Christianity is around.
Okay, so the Christianity that we have today is very, very unlike the Christianity we had 200 years ago. And the Christianity that we had 200 years ago is very, very unlike what we had 1,000 years ago. I made a video, you may have seen it, since you said that you watched my content, titled the most successful myth of religion. And it was related to this idea that Christianity and religions in general have been preserved in their current state. And, you know, there must be something to this because, you know, they've had this form of preservation, but it's just not true. There's been massive changes in, say, slavery. You know, the Bible explicitly endorses slavery. Slavery was just fine for a very long time. It was part of the transatlantic slave trade. And yet now Christians think slavery is just wrong and they have to reinterpret all of these verses. You have the homophobia in the Bible as well. That's slowly but surely making its way out. And what I mean by that is we're having, if I want to be derogatory, more of a cafeteria Christianity where someone will approach these topics and go, well, I have my morality and I have to somehow ascertain that from this book and then claim that I get it from this book. So I would definitely put pushback on the idea that Christianity has been preserved for 2,000 years. I don't think that's true. You could argue that the central motif has been preserved, but as has been seen in the sociological literature, Christianity does a good job of showing sacrificial motif, but that motif has existed in many different forms, and that's you could almost argue part of our psyche. That isn't going anywhere, and it will manifest itself in our religions, in our narratives, in our ideologies, in the stories we tell ourselves forever. If not in name of Christianity, then at least in name of something.
I have a question for you before. You are an agnostic Christian, correct?
I don't quite know yet, actually.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Know thyself. So it's something that I'm wrestling with.
What to you is the most compelling evidence for the Christian God?
Well, that's an interesting question, and where I would kind of go with Christian God is, evidence probably not. It depends on your epistemological standard or how you attribute your experience to those things. Now, how do I attribute it? I would say I probably had a idea associated, you know, with touching the divine or something like that, like a divine madness of sorts from Phaedrus.
I'm sorry, a divine. Say that one more time.
That exists. A divine madness. It's from Phaedrus. It's one of the Socratic dialogues.
Okay, I'm not familiar with
where
that.
He talks about love.
Okay.
Yeah, and passion. So, and one of the things is I would say I don't think science could prove a God exists, especially because we've kind of effectively put God outside of space and time, right? You know, or something like that. And we can't use God as the gaps because that's a really dangerous road to go down. So overall, evidence for the Christian God depends entirely on someone's epistemological standards. And as far as mine is concerned,
I do have a question. Sorry to interrupt, James. I do have a question that relates to that. I'd be very intrigued to hear what you think, if it's okay, Ethan.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing. If you could, James, talk a little bit closer into the mic because you seem to be cutting out occasionally.
Awesome. Okay, so you were saying about how God is defined in such a way as to be outside of the universe, which makes him infallible, right? There's no way to, disprove this. Well, before we talk about a way that potentially that can happen, this is similar to reincarnation. Reincarnation is very difficult to debunk, to have objections to, undercutting or rebutting defeaters, because it situates itself in such a way as to make it not accessible. But with God, we have an interesting thing that's been plaguing us, well, before Christianity was even invented or discovered or occurred, depending on your take, and that is the problem of evil, which comes up again and again and again. Because if we say that God is all powerful and we say that God is all loving, then how do you personally explain the enormous amount of suffering that we see in the world that's not due to free will? So millions and millions of years before we existed, if you accept evolution, because I just want to make this to your state of mind, millions of years before evolution, we have sentient beings dying in bushfires. Why would a good, all-powerful, all-loving God have that? I was wondering whether or not you have an answer or a way that you would deal with that reductio.
Who says he's good?
Oh, I see. So you would say that he isn't all good.
I mean, I just said who says he's good, and then how do we? I guess the only way we would be able to do that is to challenge our assumptions and our morality against his, or something to that effect. Which I don't want to fall down the trap of we can't question his morality, because I don't think that jives either, because we can question a God. Now, I don't know if it's intrinsically good or intrinsically evil. I just there may be something there, but the problem of evil, I think, kind of relates maybe to the problem of suffering or pain in some regard. And again, I'm not as well versed in some of those arguments. I would just say I think that without some form of love or self-improvement, you would, like, let me rephrase that. In order to have self-improvement and even love, you have to have pain.
Do you want to take that one, Ethan?
No, I just I'm curious a little bit more on your perspective on what God is, because it sounds like you're pretty on the fence with some things. So do you not know whether your God is good or not?
Well, I wouldn't say we know whether the God is good or not. I would just say it's in its own right. It can be a very terrifying perspective to think about, because, for example, a God who kills a child because the father made a promise to him that if I come back from this victory, I will sacrifice the first thing. And of course, this is very loose, right? That's a pretty terrifying prospect.
Right.
So what you say really does matter. And that's an important thing to consider.
Okay.
I will add to that, actually. Yeah, I will, if that's okay. So there's many references in the Bible to describing God as good. And the classical conception of God, at least with the Christians, is, well, actually with all Abrahamic religions, is that he is good. And the reason why the problem of evil is a problem for theism is because they want to maintain both of those attributes. There's various responses you can give. I entirely respect that you're not read on the literature. That's fair enough. There's many theodicies, that's what they're called. But I will just say that if you do drop one of those attributes, then the problem of evil will largely go away. So if you do say, who is to say that God is all good, and you drop that, then all of a sudden that reductio isn't going to work, because you could look at life and you can see children dying from leukemia and all of the nasty viruses and situations that we see, and you can just go, maybe there's an all-powerful God, maybe there's a God that's doing his best, but he's either not all God. You could say that there's a not omnipotent, so not all-powerful, but this God is all good, doing his best, and you can explain these situations away that way. Or you can say that he is all-powerful, but he's not all good, he doesn't care. It's just either way, you're going to end up in a situation that's very uncomfortable, and especially in relation to how God is typically defined, both historically and contemporarily. So it sounds like your Christianity is quite a bit different to what you would meet in. I can understand why you're using the agnostic term here. So I just wanted to throw that on the table for you, so you can see that you can deal with the reductio by giving up on one of those horns.
I appreciate that, Stephen. I really do appreciate that. And one of the things I think I would maybe just kind of expand on is the idea. So I think good is, I don't want to get too crazy and get, caught between good and evil and all that fun stuff. I would just say, I think that on the all good part, that's a matter of perspective in some regards. And I don't know if that's super useful sometimes. Now, omnipotent, that's actually an interesting way to look at it. And one of the things that I struggle with is what's the relationship to his creation. And if God enters into a covenant with someone, that would be a limitation on his power. So he would no longer fit the definition of omnipotence within the contract. And we see him entering into contracts or covenants in some ways. And so I don't know, maybe it's honoring your contract, in which case is that good or bad? And now we have to maybe examine that further.
When you say he's entering into contracts, what do you mean by that?
So he enters into a covenant with Abraham, right? He enters into he says, even at the end of the flood story, right? I will never, here's your magical rainbow, and that's a sign of that, of what I did. I'll never do this again. So, hey, that's like a contract in some regards. That's saying, hey, I'm never going to do this again. And so I'm limiting my power fundamentally to, deal with you. And he also, and you can see that come to its I don't want to say logical conclusion, but you can see some of that in Christ, right? So now he has limited his power in one way in order to sacrifice himself and that motif, and then therefore give us grace and advocate, all that fun stuff, which is also further limiting in contract, covenant and contractual relationship with his creation.
Okay. So earlier you had said that you don't think God could be scientifically proven to exist. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't know where science could discover the supernatural, and that is something that, we've been wrestling with for quite some time.
So if you had to present a case to a skeptic panel, like Steve and myself right now, what do you think we would find most compelling, or what evidence would we find most compelling that we could discuss right now for the existence of, it doesn't have to be the Christian God, it could just be God in general?
Well, there's maybe a few. I don't know about evidence, to be honest with you. And the reason why is because I don't know if under certain frameworks it's a convincing factor or something like that, where you can be convinced of the existence of a God. Now, there is probably something associated with connection to people you hang out with or you associate yourself with that might start to go down that line. But I don't know if I would submit any evidence other than to continue always improving ourselves and continuing asking the great questions in life.
Well, I do genuinely appreciate your honesty and openness. It's definitely refreshing. We got to wrap up and get to our next caller in a moment.
If I could just
Steve,
quickly drop two quick responses, if that's all right, because
please.
yeah, it's a very thoroughly enjoyable conversation, and likewise to what Ethan just said. Thank you for your time. But I thought I'd offer you a quick response to the contract stuff. If I had the ability to punch at a certain power, right, and then I said to someone, "Hey, I'm going to go easy on you. This is a contract I'm entering into. I'm only going to tap you lightly," I still have the ability to hit hard. So rather, what I'm doing is honoring a commitment, but I'd still have that power. I'm just limiting it according to a circumstance. Likewise, if God was to enter a contract with Moses or whoever it might be and say, "Hey, listen, you know that genocide I did with Noah? I'm not going to do that again." He still could. It's just the only reason he doesn't do it is to obey by the contract, but he still has the power to do it. And then the second point I wanted to potentially leave you with then is that the problem of animal suffering before we exist is a really I think it's a very powerful and potent example of the problem of evil, because if you have sentient creatures suffering in bushfires or just nature in general, natural selection is very, very brutal, long before humans have even evolved, then this idea of entering into a contract cannot make any sense, because there was no humans to make contracts with that could possibly provide a form of justification for this untold violence and horrific evil that we see in the world. But yeah, sorry to if I've taken things too far aside, but I did want to just give you a good response.
Keep going if you had more.
No, that's good. That's good. I just wanted to offer that up to James.
James, in a minute or less, did you have any closing remarks?
Oh man, I hate you for limiting to a minute.
All right, 2 minutes.
Oh, that's fair. Hey, so Ethan, thank you so much for what you do, brother. You're a friendly neighborhood atheist. Keep it up. Appreciate it. And then Stephen, Rationality Rules in more ways than one. However, I think it's a limited framework in some ways. So thank you so much for what you do, and I'll continue to follow your channel. It's been a privilege and an honor to speak with you both. Well, I will take your nuggets and I will go forth with them. Thank you.
Best of luck on your journey, James. Like, genuinely, best of luck. I hope you find the measure of peace I think you're looking for.
I hope I never do, actually.
What? Wait. Why?
Because the destination is not what matters. It's the journey that matters.
Oh, wisdom being dropped. Look at that. Love it.
Awesome, James. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
All right. Have a good one. All right. That was your first call, Steve. What'd you think?
That was lovely. What a lovely phone call to get. James seemed just like an absolutely earnest, lovely individual. I genuinely wish him all the best. It was a good conversation. Like, again, thanks for having me on, by the way. Really enjoyed it.